What's up, fellas? My name is Tucker, and welcome to the day after the NBA draft. We have a ton of stuff to talk about, trade stuff, draft stuff. We're going to talk about the biggest winners and losers from the draft last night. Quickly, before we get started, if you liked the video, leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials right there. Let's go and get started. Okay, let's start on a positive note with my first winner, and that is the Charlotte Hornets. A team that at 11 got James BOUKNIGHT, and then at 19 they end up with Kai Jones as well. BOUKNIGHT probably went a little bit later than some people thought. Him going after Davion Mitchell was a little bit of a surprise, and I think it's certainly an interesting fit with Charlotte. This is a team that already has LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier, Devontae Graham. They're adding BOUKNIGHT to that, but Graham's restricted free agency is up in the air. Rozier's contract runs out relatively soon, so if you think BOUKNIGHT is a long-term answer in the backcourt alongside LaMelo Ball, that's good value there at 11, and then adding Kai Jones is a really nice upside prospect at the center position. Certainly helps this roster as well. That's one of their biggest areas of need. They also added Mason PLUMLEE prior to the draft as well to the roster to add to that center depth, with some questions about what's going to be happening with Tyler Zeller this offseason. And just in general, it's just a couple of really smart moves for them where they add high upside players that fit the roster, and they're starting to look like a playoff team for next year with LaMelo, with BOUKNIGHT, with Rozier, Hayward, PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, the bigs they've added. I really, really like this team. They're super, super fun, and I wanted to kind of start on a positive note with them. But now we move to our first loser. You might have been able to guess this one. It's the Sacramento Kings. Of all the teams in the lottery that I felt like made some surprising picks, or, of course, San Antonio selecting Primo at 12 was one that a lot of people were kind of on. But Davion Mitchell is a prospect that I liked, but I liked him on a team that had a good structure, and he was going to be able to come in and be a winning player immediately. A team like Golden State was kind of an ideal fit for someone like him. And typically Sacramento's not a great place to go if you're a drafted player, but also I just don't like the fit. This was already a team that's shopping Buddy HIELD. They missed out on an opportunity to get value out of HIELD by sending him to the Lakers, but if you're already trying to send HIELD somewhere else and then you bring in another guard, and then you've got Halliburton already, you've got Fox, if your stated goal is to get better next year and to try and get into the play-in, how much better are you really getting if you're sending out HIELD then replacing him with a guard? I just felt like they needed some help on the wings. They could have used a big. And if they were going to pick a guard, I would have rather had BOUKNIGHT than Mitchell. It's just a very odd situation. I think you could also put Davion Mitchell as a loser here as well. Again, it's generally not a great start to your NBA career as a drafted player when you end up in Sacramento. And I know that they had a good selection last year with Halliburton. They probably deserve the benefit of the doubt based off the guard selection from the year before. But just in terms of roster fit and helping this team get better, I think it's certainly questionable. And I mean, they're kind of forced now into a Buddy HIELD trade because of the amount of guards that they do have on this roster. Next up now, though, in the winner category, as is pretty usual, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They turned the 16th pick in the draft and taking on Derek Favors' salary into 3 more future first-round picks. Now, we'll kind of wait and see in the future if the 2 picks that they got for 16 end up being worth it, because there's I think it's a top 14 and a top 16 protected future first. So, both those end up at 28 or something, or, they're not conveyed until the years after. We'll have to kind of wait and see. All of those, or each of the picks that they got, though, are relatively likely to fall within that top 16, top 14 protection for next year, and then you just kind of roll over the protection. So maybe one of these in 2026 ends up being a good pick. But I think the point for Oklahoma City is if they weren't in love with any of the prospects at 16, they brought in plenty of young guys. And so if they can continue to just roll those over into future first, continue to add to the draft capital, I'm cool with it. And it just continues kind of the path for them. I'm glad they kept Shea. They didn't trade away SGA. I know they really wanted to go up to number 1, but just continuing to add draft capital, just the value that you're getting out of taking on Derek Favors in the 16th pick, turning that into 3 first-round picks is obviously a hugely positive thing. Prior to the draft lottery, I know a lot of people, myself included, were kind of hoping that Oklahoma City would get like the 1st and the 5th pick in this draft. That's not the way the lottery worked out. So in the long run, maybe this draft didn't give them as much as they would have hoped from a high upside young prospect type of scenario. But getting that kind of value out of 16th and Favors is really, really good for them, in my opinion. Next up now, a loser, the New York Knicks. And I'm not like, I don't want to be too harsh about this. I'm just confused. They went from having 19 and 20 to selecting a player at 25, and they got other players in the draft and things like that. But it felt like for the first time a little bit, they didn't really know what they wanted to do. I mean, they've got interesting young players on the roster, but it's not a roster that's complete by any means. They need shooting. They need perimeter playmaking. I think we saw in the postseason how much they really struggled to create a significant amount of perimeter offense to the point where they're really leaning on guys like Derrick Rose to create for them and Alec Burks and guys like that. And even with as good of a rookie year as someone like Emmanuel quickly had and some of the upside of someone like Mitchell Robinson when he does get healthy, they still needed to add young talent, and to go from having 19 and 21 with some good prospects on the board to going down to 25, they select a player there, but I was just very, very confused, and they're getting future value, and it does save them a bit of money this year with only having one first-round rookie on the payroll as compared to two. Excuse me. Maybe that's part of the mindset here is they really want to make sure they're saving a little bit of money to have as much salary cap space as possible. That's absolutely the case, or that absolutely could be the case. And getting future draft assets as well for a potential star trade rather than just having young players at 19 and 21 that, for example, Washington or Portland might not be super invested in. Maybe they'd rather just have the future first in a potential trade scenario. That's something that I could see making sense, but it just felt weird going into the night where it was like, oh, they're going to get a nice player at 19 and 21. There were good players on the board. And for them to pass on that opportunity and for their roster to look pretty much the same today as it did yesterday with a few exceptions is a little bit strange to me. So not a huge loser, but just a team I wanted to talk about that I was certainly a little bit confused by kind of their mindset last time on draft night. Next up, a winner for me, huge winner, potentially the biggest winner of the night, is the Orlando Magic. I kind of went into the night not really knowing what they were going to do with these picks. I thought it was possible they'd end up with Scottie Barnes at 5 and Kuminga at 8, and that is just kind of typical Orlando Magic stuff, right? Where these are bigger wings that are raw, have potential, have upside, but you don't know if they're going to develop in anything. They've got plenty of guys like that. Jonathan Isaac's one of my favorite players in the league when fully healthy, but they've just over the years, Aaron Gordon, Mo Bamba, they've drafted upside. Whereas in this class, they finally get guys that I'm confident, worst case, are going to be really good NBA players, whether it's Wagner, whether it's Suggs. Like getting Jalen Suggs at 5, I know they have a ton of guards, and I know you can make the case that Scottie Barnes fits better, but when Toronto passed on Suggs at 4, I was very surprised. Barnes, I'm sure, is going to be good for them. It's Toronto. They develop players really well. They've got a couple other guards. They keep Lowry, Van Vliet, whatever the case may be. I don't really care if I'm Orlando about all the other guards I have on the roster. I like I like Jalen Suggs better than every guard on the roster for Orlando right now. Markelle Fultz, even when healthy, I'd rather have Jalen Suggs. Cole Anthony, same thing. RJ Hampton, who they got in a trade near the middle of the year from Denver, had some nice moments, but I'd rather have Jalen Suggs than any of those guys, and I think that Suggs is a guy that can play with any one of those. And so if you can find a guard that plays well alongside him out of those other guys, whether it's Fultz, whether it's Anthony, whether it's RJ Hampton, then fantastic, and I'll move on with those two guys, and I'll do something with the other two. But I think it's fantastic value, and then I think Wagner, provides them a kind of player that they don't really have on this roster as well. Provides them spacing that they desperately need from an offensive skill standpoint. I think they really upgraded. It's a huge deal for them to have those guys both slide to them at 5 and 8, and shows really good value out of not only the Bulls trade they got, they had in exchange for Vucevic, but as well as their own pick there at the top of the lottery. Next up, another winner is just the fans, right? I mean, I think it was a really fun draft night. It's a little bit confusing. We'll talk about that here in a second with all the different trades, but with the Russell Westbrook trade, with all the movement, with a lot of surprises on draft night, it was one of the more active and entertaining draft nights that I can remember in recent years. And it's just a ton of fun, a ton of stuff to talk about. Very interesting and intriguing draft night. If you want to see my thoughts about the Russell Westbrook trade, I already made a video about that last night. You guys can check that out here. But then the last point here in the losers category. Can the NBA do something about their draft presentation? How many times were you watching the draft last night, and for example, the 10th pick comes up, and you're like, oh, what's New Orleans going to do here? Plot twist, it's Memphis's pick. 17 comes up. Oh, what's Memphis going to do? Plot twist, it's New Orleans' pick. How about when some kid went to, the pick was made by New York, and then he ended up being traded to the Clippers, but they didn't know that. And so the people at ESPN were talking about this guy's fit with the Knicks for 5 minutes when we already knew that he had been traded to the Clippers. I don't understand why it's so difficult for them to figure out a way to do a draft presentation where everybody knows where the picks are at all times. The NFL does it. The NFL has trade up and trade down every 2 seconds, and they are very clear when you're watching. There's very little confusion about where the picks are, where each prospect is going to. And in the NBA, for whatever reason, you've got to continue to remind yourself and do all the work yourselves about where all the proposed trade stuff is going down. I know that it's difficult with the teams reporting it, not reporting it. They can't just go off what Woj says. It's just difficult from a TV presentation standpoint, but figure it out. Other leagues are doing it. Figure out a better way to make it happen. It's just a little confusing when there's as much stuff happening last night as there was, which is exciting and it's interesting, especially for someone like me. But when I don't even know what's going on and I'm confused, and Adam Silver is up there at the podium being confused himself and just reading off a card and having no idea what's happening, that's a bit of an issue. But that's all the negative stuff I have. It was a super fun draft night. Hope you guys enjoyed the draft. I certainly did. And now we've got NBA free agency, by the way, opens up in about 3 days. So the content is certainly not going to stop anytime soon. But that's what we love about the NBA and about the off season. Hope you guys are happy about what players your team ended up selecting, and we'll kind of see what happens with these guys now over the next couple of years. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like rating on it. Consider subscribing for more NBA content every single day. As I said in the beginning, my name is Tucker. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.